At 4 p.m. on December 26, 1944, Second Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda stood rigid on the tarmac of a dusty airfield in the Philippines. He was 22 years old, wearing a crisp Imperial Japanese Army uniform that fit him perfectly. In his belt was a standard-issue officer's sword, the blade forged from tempered steel. Slung over his shoulder was an Arisaka Type 99 short rifle, serial number 8972, with the Imperial chrysanthemum crest stamped on the receiver. He carried 600 rounds of 7.7 ammunition in leather pouches, a map case, and a compass. He was an intelligence officer, a graduate of the elite Futamata branch of the Nakano School, where they taught unconventional warfare, sabotage, and survival. His commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, stepped forward. The major's face was grim. The war was turning against Japan, and everyone knew it. Taniguchi looked Onoda in the eye and gave him a set of orders that would become the most famous command in military history. The major said, "You are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens will come back for you. Until then, so long as you have one soldier, you are to continue to lead him. You may have to live on coconuts. If that's the case, live on coconuts. Under no circumstances are you to give up your life voluntarily." Onoda memorized every syllable. He saluted. He boarded a transport plane bound for Lubang Island, a strategic landmass 93 miles southwest of Manila. The engines roared to life. Onoda watched the ground fall away. He did not know that he would not touch that sword or surrender that rifle until March of 1974. Onoda arrived on Lubang Island on December 31, 1944. His mission was specific: destroy the airfield at the northern tip of the island and demolish the pier at the port of Tilak. The goal was to prevent American forces from using the island as a staging ground for the invasion of Manila. But the situation on the ground was chaotic. The garrison commander on Lubang outranked Onoda. He was a conventional officer who believed in static defense. He refused to listen to the 22-year-old commando. He refused to destroy the runway. He refused to sabotage the pier. He ordered his men to dig trenches and prepare for a beach landing. Onoda knew this was suicide. Static defenses against American naval bombardment were useless. But he was a junior officer. He had to obey. On February 28, 1945, the inevitable happened. An American task force appeared on the horizon. The bombardment began at 0800. By 0930, the first wave of Marines hit the beach. The Japanese garrison, dug into their trenches, was decimated. The airfield that Onoda had wanted to destroy was captured intact within 48 hours. The surviving Japanese soldiers scattered. Most were killed in the first week. Others surrendered in groups, exhausted and starving, but Onoda did not surrender. He remembered the order: forbidden to die, forbidden to give up. He retreated into the mountainous interior of the island. He gathered stragglers as he moved. Eventually, the group whittled down to just 3 other men who were willing to keep fighting: Corporal Shoichi Shimada, 30 years old, Private First Class Kinshichi Kazuka, 24 years old, and Private Yuichi Akatsu, 22 years old. These 4 men formed a guerrilla cell. They moved to the highest peak, waiting for the Japanese counterattack that they were sure would come. August 1945 came and went. The atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The emperor announced the surrender. The war ended for the rest of the world. But on Lubang Island, the war was just entering a new silent phase. In October 1945, Onoda found the first leaflet. It was lying on a cowpath near a farm. He picked it up carefully, checking for booby traps. It read, "The war ended on August 15. Come down from the mountains. Onoda showed it to Shimada. They analyzed the paper quality. It was high-grade bond paper, better than anything the Japanese army used in the field. They analyzed the phrasing. The Japanese characters were grammatically correct, but the tone was wrong. It sounded like a direct translation from English. Onoda, trained in intelligence, deduced that this was an American psychological operation. The Allies were trying to lure them out of their fortified positions to slaughter them. "It is a trick," Onoda said. "If Japan had lost, we would see American soldiers everywhere, but we only see Philippine police." They tore up the leaflet. The first 4 years were a brutal lesson in jungle survival. They had to reinvent how they lived. Their uniforms began to rot in the humidity. The cotton fibers disintegrated. They scavenged tents left behind by American forces or stolen from locals. They used heavy needles made from wire to sew new clothes from the canvas. The canvas was rough and chafed their skin, but it was durable. Shoes were a constant problem. The leather boots they arrived in fell apart within 6 months. They began hunting local cattle. When they killed a cow, they didn't just eat the meat. They took the hide. They cured it in the sun, scraping off the fat with their bayonets. They cut the leather into shapes and fashioned crude sandals. When the leather wore out, they scavenged rubber tires from abandoned jeeps and cut soles from the treads. Food was a mathematical equation. They needed calories to patrol, but patrolling burned calories. They stole rice from the farmers in the lowlands. They would watch a village for 3 days, mapping the movements of the farmers. When the fields were left unguarded, they would strike at night, filling their packs with unhusked rice. They also relied on jungle cows, cattle that had wandered into the mountains. To kill a cow without alerting the police required precision. They would track a herd silently. Onoda would select a target. He would use his Arisaka, 1 shot to the head. They couldn't risk a second shot. The sound would carry for miles. Once the cow was down, the work began. They had to butcher the animal quickly, dry the meat over a smokeless fire to preserve it, and move immediately. The smell of blood attracted flies, and flies attracted patrols. Weapon maintenance became a religion. In the humid, salty air of the Philippines, steel rusts overnight. Onoda established a strict protocol. Every evening before sleep, they stripped their rifles. They didn't have gun oil, so they made their own. They took coconuts, grated the meat, boiled it in a helmet, and skimmed the oil from the top. This coconut oil was thick and smelled sweet, but it protected the metal. They lubricated the firing pins. They checked the extractor claws for pitting. They counted their ammunition. Onoda had started with 600 rounds. Every single round was inspected. If a round showed green corrosion on the brass casing, they polished it with sand until it shined. A corroded round could jam the rifle. A jammed rifle meant death. In September 1949, the group dynamic shattered. Private Akatsu had always been the weakest link. He was not a commando, he was a conscript. The psychological pressure of the endless war broke him. During a night patrol, he lingered behind. When Onoda signaled to move out, Akatsu didn't follow. He slipped away into the darkness. Onoda waited for an hour. He circled back, no sign of him. Onoda assumed Akatsu had been captured or killed by a python. But 6 months later, in 1950, Akatsu walked into a Philippine police station and surrendered. Akatsu's surrender changed everything. He told the Philippine authorities that the other 3 were still alive. This triggered a massive search operation. The Philippine government, working with the Japanese embassy, dropped thousands of new leaflets. They dropped letters written by Akatsu himself. They dropped photos of Akatsu standing with his family in Japan. Onoda found a packet of these photos. He looked at Akatsu's face. He looked at the background. He told Shimada and Kazuka, "Look at his eyes. He is not looking at the camera. He is looking at his interrogators. They are forcing him to do this. This is a trick." He believed Akatsu was a prisoner of war being used as a pawn. The three men moved their camp deeper into the mountains to a ridge that was almost inaccessible. For the next 4 years, the trio escalated their war. They weren't just hiding, they were fighting. They believed their mission was to harass the enemy rear lines to prepare for the eventual Japanese landing. They burned farmers' crops to deny the enemy supplies. They shot at police patrols to test their reaction times. They saw the expansion of the local villages not as peaceful growth but as enemy colonization. Then came May 7, 1954, the date that reduced the group to two. Onoda, Shimada, and Kazuka were moving along the beach at Gontan. They were looking for a new source of salt. Salt was critical. Without it, they suffered from cramps and dizziness. They spotted a small fishing boat beached on the sand. It seemed abandoned. Shimada moved forward to check it. Onoda covered him from the tree line. Kazuka watched the rear. It was a trap, or maybe just bad luck. A Philippine police patrol was resting in a hut nearby. They saw Shimada on the beach. The first shot cracked through the air. It hit the sand near Shimada's feet. Shimada turned to run. He was 40 years old now, his body worn down by 9 years of jungle living. He wasn't fast enough. The police opened fire with carbines. Onoda returned fire with his Arisaka, the bolt clicking smoothly as he cycled rounds. He aimed for the muzzle flashes. He saw Shimada stumble. A bullet had struck him in the leg. Shimada tried to crawl toward the tree line. Onoda shouted at him to move, but the police had the angle. A second bullet struck Shimada in the forehead. He stopped moving instantly. Onoda and Kazuka didn't have time to mourn. They laid down, suppressing fire, snap, crack, forcing the police to keep their heads down. Then they turned and vanished into the jungle. They ran for 3 hours without stopping. When they finally collapsed in a ravine, they realized the truth. There were only 2 of them left. The hierarchy was gone. It was just 2 men, 2 rifles, and a war that would not end. From 1954 to 1972, a period of 18 years, Onoda and Kazuka lived as a single organism. They stopped speaking in full sentences. They knew what the other was thinking. They developed a routine that was almost monastic. They woke up at 0400 before the sun. They cooked their rice while it was still dark so the smoke wouldn't be seen. They ate in silence. By 0600, they were on the move. They never stayed in the same spot for more than 3 days. They had a network of 20 different campsites across the island. Some were for the dry season near hidden springs. Some were for the wet season on high ground to avoid flash floods. They maintained their military readiness through scheduled training exercises. Once a year, usually during the monsoon season when the sound of rain would mask the noise, they would fire their rifles. They would pick a specific tree at 100 yards. They would each fire 2 rounds, then they would check the grouping. If the sights were off, they adjusted them. They rotated their ammunition stock. They had about 400 rounds left between them. They wrapped the ammo in layers of plastic scavenged from trash, then in rubber, then in canvas. They buried these ammo caches in secret locations, marking them on maps that existed only in their heads. During this period, they also engaged in intelligence gathering. They would creep close to the villages at night. They would listen to the radios playing in the farmers' huts. They heard music. They heard news reports, but the news was confusing. They heard about the Korean War. They heard about the Vietnam War. To Onoda, this confirmed his theory. The Great East Asia War was still going on, but the front lines had shifted. He believed the Japanese Imperial Army had retreated to Manchuria and was fighting a long, slow counter-offensive. He believed the American jets flying overhead were bombers heading to bomb Japanese cities. He saw the developing Philippine economy, the new roads, the new lights, as evidence of American occupation logistics. Everything he saw fit into the narrative he had constructed. In 1958, they found a transistor radio abandoned in a hut. This was a gold mine. They took it back to their camp, but batteries were a problem. They learned to steal batteries from flashlights left on porches. They listened to Japanese radio broadcasts. They heard about the Tokyo Olympics in 1964. They heard about the bullet train. Kazuka asked, "Is this real? Has Japan really recovered this much?" Onoda replied, "It is an illusion. The government in Tokyo is a puppet government installed by the Americans. The real government is in exile in Manchuria. These broadcasts are propaganda to make us surrender." The logic was circular, unbreakable. Any proof that the war was over was dismissed as a trick. Any proof of conflict was accepted as evidence the war continued. The physical toll was immense. They suffered from tropical ulcers. A small scratch from a thorn would get infected in the humidity. It would swell, turn green, and eat into the muscle. They didn't have antibiotics. They used traditional remedies. They would crush garlic and pack it into the wound, or they would heat the blade of a knife and cauterize the infection. They suffered from malaria. When the fever hit, they would lie shivering in the mud, wrapping themselves in wet canvas to bring the temperature down. They took turns guarding each other. If Onoda was shaking with fever, Kazuka would sit up all night with his rifle, watching the jungle. If Kazuka was sick, Onoda took the watch. They were keeping each other alive not just physically, but mentally. But the 1970s brought a change to Lubang Island. The farmers were pushing deeper into the mountains. They were burning the forest to clear land for crops. This squeezed Onoda and Kazuka into smaller and smaller territories. They became more aggressive. They started burning the farmers' harvested rice shocks. They shot cows more frequently. The local police, tired of the mountain bandits, requested reinforcements. The Philippine constabulary sent a specialized unit to hunt them down. The net was closing. On October 19, 1972, the two men decided to conduct a sabotage mission near the village of Saalbeck. The plan was routine: creep down to the fields at dusk, set fire to the rice shocks to destroy the harvest, and retreat before the police could respond. They had done it 100 times. They moved into position at 17:00. They waited for the sun to set. At 17:30, they lit their torches. The dry rice straw caught fire instantly. The flames leaped up, illuminating the field. That was the mistake. The light. A Philippine police patrol was already in the area. They saw the fire. They saw the two figures silhouetted against the flames. They opened fire immediately. At 17:31 on October 19, 1972, the rice field in Saalbeck was illuminated by the orange glow of burning straw. Corporal Kazuka was standing near a burning shock, holding his Arisaka rifle in his right hand. He was 51 years old. He had spent 27 years in the jungle. His reactions were no longer those of a young soldier. When the police opened fire, Kazuka hesitated for a fraction of a second. He turned toward the sound of the shots. A single bullet, a .30 caliber round fired from an M1 carbine, struck him in the chest. It pierced his right lung and exited through his back. Kazuka didn't scream. He simply collapsed forward into the mud. Onoda was 10 yards away. He saw his last soldier fall. He saw the blood spreading on the wet ground. He fired 2 rapid shots at the police muzzle flashes, suppressing fire just as he had been trained at Nakano. He sprinted to Kazuka's body. He grabbed Kazuka's rifle. He tried to lift him, but Kazuka was dead weight. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. The police were advancing, shouting. Onoda had a choice: die with his friend or follow the order. Forbidden to die. Onoda grabbed the ammunition pouch from Kazuka's belt, turned, and ran into the darkness. He ran for 3 hours. He didn't stop until he reached the high ridge known as Snake Hill. He sat down in the mud, panting, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was alone. For the first time in 27 years, there was no one to watch his back, no one to talk to, no one to confirm that the war was real. He cleaned Kazuka's rifle. He cleaned his own rifle. He counted the ammunition. He now had 2 rifles and roughly 500 rounds of 7.7 ammunition. He was a one-man army. The death of Kazuka made global headlines. Tokyo was shocked. They assumed the Lubang stragglers had died decades ago. The Japanese government launched a massive search operation. They sent 150 men to the island. They brought Onoda's brother, Toshio, and his aging father. They set up loudspeakers on the mountain ridges. For weeks, the jungle echoed with the voice of his brother. "Hiroo, come out, the war is over, we are here to take you home." Onoda heard the voices. He lay hidden in the undergrowth less than 200 yards away. He watched them through the dense foliage. He saw his brother. He saw the Japanese flag. But his mind, sharpened by 3 decades of paranoia, twisted the reality. He noted that the Japanese search party was accompanied by Philippine officials. He noted that they used modern equipment. He concluded that the Americans had captured his family. He believed they were forcing his brother to speak or perhaps using a voice actor to mimic him. He whispered to himself, if they really cared, they would send a military officer. They would send a secret code. This is a trap. He stayed hidden. The search party left after 6 months empty-handed. They declared him dead, likely killed by the jungle itself. For the next year, Onoda lived in total silence. He spoke to no one. To keep his sanity, he recited his favorite poems. He replayed the memories of his childhood in Wakayama. He meticulously planned raids that he would never execute. He became a ghost. He woke up, cleaned his rifle, patrolled his territory, ate his boiled bananas, cleaned his rifle again, and slept. He was waiting. He didn't know what for, but he was waiting. On February 20th, 1974, the wait ended. Norio Suzuki was a 24-year-old college dropout from Japan. He was an eccentric adventurer. He had told his friends he was leaving Japan to find 3 things: Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order. He arrived on Lubang alone. He didn't bring a search party. He didn't bring weapons. He brought a tent, a camera, and a supply of Japanese cigarettes. He pitched his tent in a clearing near the Wakayama River, an area Onoda was known to frequent. At 16:00, Onoda was patrolling the riverbank. He saw the tent. It was orange, a color no soldier would use. He crept closer. He saw a young man sitting outside cooking rice. Onoda watched him for an hour. The man looked Japanese. He smelled Japanese. Onoda decided to take the risk. He burst from the bushes, his Arisaka leveled at the stranger's chest. "Freeze!" he screamed in Japanese. Suzuki didn't run. He didn't reach for a weapon. He stood up slowly, raising his hands. He looked at the wild, emaciated figure before him, the torn uniform, the rusted sword, the eyes burning with intensity. Suzuki bowed deeply. "Onoda-san," Suzuki said, his voice trembling but clear. "The Emperor and the people of Japan are worried about you." Onoda lowered the rifle slightly. "The Emperor?" he asked. Suzuki invited him to sit. They sat on a log. Suzuki offered him a cigarette. Onoda accepted. His hands were shaking. For the next 8 hours they talked. Suzuki told him everything. He told him about the surrender in 1945. He showed him newspapers from Tokyo. He explained that Major Taniguchi was alive, working as a bookseller. He explained that Japan was an economic superpower, not a ruined wasteland. Onoda listened. He looked at the photos. The logic was sound, the evidence was overwhelming, but the discipline was absolute. Onoda stood up. "I believe you," he said, "but I am an officer of the Imperial Army. I received direct orders to conduct guerrilla warfare. I cannot surrender based on a newspaper. I cannot leave my post without a direct order from my commanding officer." Suzuki asked, "If I bring Major Taniguchi to you, will you surrender?" Onoda nodded. "Yes, if he gives the order." Suzuki left the next morning. Onoda went back into the jungle. He spent the next 2 weeks preparing. If this was the end, he would leave with dignity. He washed his uniform in the river, scrubbing it with sand until the canvas was pale but clean. He sewed the tears. He polished the brass buttons with coconut husk. He disassembled his rifle one last time, oiling every spring, every screw. He sharpened his sword until it could shave the hair off his arm. He counted his ammunition, 500 rounds. He packed his gear. He waited. On March 9, 1974, a helicopter landed in the clearing at Wakayama Point. Norio Suzuki stepped out. Behind him walked an old man with a slight limp. It was Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. He was wearing a hastily tailored uniform that was too loose for him, but he wore the cap of a major. At 15:00 hours, Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda emerged from the tree line. He walked with a steady, marching cadence. He stopped 5 paces from Taniguchi. The air was silent. The wind rustled the palm trees. Onoda snapped a salute so sharp it vibrated. "Second Lieutenant Onoda reporting for duty, sir," he shouted. Taniguchi returned the salute. His hands were shaking. He unfolded a piece of paper. It was the Tubetsu Special Order. He read aloud, "Imperial Command to Special Squad. The Imperial Command has ceased all combat activity. The Special Squad under the command of Lieutenant Onoda is hereby relieved of all military duties. You are to cease all hostilities immediately and place yourself under the command of the nearest superior officer." Onoda stood rigid. He listened to the words, "cease all hostilities." It was over. The war was actually over. His legs felt weak. The tension that had held him upright for 29 years suddenly evaporated. He looked at Taniguchi. "We really lost?" he asked, his voice cracking. Taniguchi nodded. Onoda wept. He cried not for himself, but for Shimada and Kazuka. Why did they have to die, he thought. If the war ended in 1945, they died for nothing. I wasted their lives. The official surrender ceremony took place 2 days later on March 11th at the Philippine Air Force radar base. It was a media spectacle. Journalists from around the world were there. General Jose Rancudo of the Philippine Air Force stood waiting. Onoda marched forward. He held his officer's sword with both hands. He bowed and presented the hilt to the general. This was the ultimate act of submission for a samurai. Then he laid down his rifle, the Arisaka Type 99, serial number 8972. The wood was dark with oil and sweat. The metal was black and perfect. It was in better condition than the rifles of the Philippine Honor Guard standing nearby. He placed his ammunition pouches on the table. He placed his dagger. He took off his pack. He was no longer a soldier. He was just a 52-year-old man in a strange world. President Ferdinand Marcos was present. He had signed a special presidential decree pardoning Onoda for all acts committed during the 29 years. Technically, Onoda was a criminal. He had killed 30 people, wounded 100, and destroyed crops and livestock. But Marcos understood the unique tragedy of the situation. He handed the sword back to Onoda. "You were a soldier doing your duty," Marcos said. "Return to your people." Onoda returned to Japan on March 12, 1974. His arrival was chaotic. 5,000 people crowded Haneda Airport. They waved flags. They cheered. They saw him as the last true samurai, a symbol of the values loyalty, sacrifice, discipline that modern Japan had forgotten. But Onoda looked at the crowd with cold eyes. He saw a Japan that was soft. He saw men in suits who cared only about money. He saw a country occupied by American culture. He felt like a stranger in his own home. The government offered him a large sum of money as back pay for 29 years of service. Onoda refused to keep it. He donated the entire amount to the Yasukuni Shrine to honor the spirits of the war dead. He tried to write a book, but the media attention was suffocating. He couldn't sleep in a bed. He had to sleep on the floor. He couldn't eat soft rice. His stomach couldn't handle it. In 1975, disillusioned with modern Japan, Onoda emigrated to Brazil. He bought a remote cattle ranch in Mato Grosso do Sul. He wanted to live in the wild, battling nature just as he had on Lubang. He married a Japanese woman, Machi, who taught tea ceremony. Together, they built a life in the emptiness of Brazil. He raised 1,200 head of cattle. He became a leader in the local Japanese-Brazilian community, but the legacy of Lubang pulled him back. In 1984, he read a news story about a Japanese teenager who had killed his parents with a baseball bat. Onoda was horrified. He believed Japanese youth had become weak and fragile. He decided to return to Japan periodically to establish the Onoda Nature School. His goal was to teach children survival skills. He wanted to teach them how to make fire, how to climb trees, how to endure cold and hunger. He told the parents, "I am not teaching them how to be soldiers. I am teaching them how to be strong humans. A strong human does not give up." In 1996, at the age of 74, Onoda traveled back to the Philippines. He went to Lubang Island. He walked the trails he had patrolled for decades. He visited the spot where Shimada died. He visited the rice field in Salbec where Kazuka fell. He knelt in the mud and prayed. He donated $10,000 to the local school in Lubang. It was a scholarship fund for the children of the islanders. He met with some of the farmers he had terrorized. They shook hands. It was a complex moment. Forgiveness is hard, but time creates a strange bond between hunter and hunted. Hiroo Onoda died of heart failure on January 16, 2014 at St. Luke's International Hospital in Tokyo. He was 91 years old. His legacy is complicated. To some, he was a hero of loyalty. To others, he was a stubborn relic who killed innocent people for a delusion. But physically, his story is a testament to the limits of human endurance. He survived 10,000 nights in the jungle. He maintained a rifle for 29 years with coconut oil. He lived on bananas and stolen rice. He obeyed an order until the man who gave it came to take it back. His Arisaka Type 99 rifle currently sits in the Yushukan Museum in Tokyo. It is displayed in a glass case. Visitors often walk past it, glancing at the rusted grenades and the tattered uniform. But if you look closely at the rifle, you will see something incredible. The bolt is still shiny. The rifling in the barrel is still sharp. Even after 50 years in a museum, it looks ready to fire. It is a silent witness to the man who fought World War II until 1974 because he promised he wouldn't quit. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from the archives every single day. Stories about men who defied time, logic, and death. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, the Philippines, Brazil, or Japan? Our community stretches across the entire world. You are not just a viewer, you are part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Hiroo Onoda is never forgotten.